Good day. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm Truth Bomb riffing the con on Thursday, December 28th at approximately 10:30 a.m. my time. And you know, Rebel Moon is trending on Twitter. I happened to recatch The Big Lebowski recently, and as well as I think I rewatched Kingpin not too long ago. And I try to keep a good attitude in the holidays, particularly watching football. And congratulations to USC, who showed up with a bunch of people we never heard of and played Louisville into the ground yesterday. And it looks like Oklahoma State um, got one up on Texas A&M. In a pretty tight game, and a lot of great entertainment and sports and the Final Four of football to come. Not to mention the playoffs and all of those great things that I love to experience with my friends and smack talk and all of those other things. But in the midst of a lot of other crazy things that are going on in this world, and I have this channel, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, and I've done it now for I think 438 truth bombs, going back to I believe February of 2022. And the reason I launched this page was to try to bring who I am as a person, how I'm, I guess, reacting to whatever the daily sort of echo chamber is, the news cycle, those sorts of things that, have the attention of millions of people, to try to further provide insight, knowledge, awareness, all sorts of different framing, critiques, that sort of thing, um, to elevate the information I have to a public that doesn't get it. And who am I? I'm a independent television producer and investigative journalist. I consider myself a muckraker. If you don't know what muckraker is, I encourage you to explore online and discover who the muckrakers were, because in the United States, we've had a tradition of journalists that are truth seekers that go inside the machines and the apparatuses of power to reveal how things work. Really kind of got its first start with Upton Sinclair in the Jungle to reveal child working conditions in the meat packing district, I believe, I do know it was in New York, and I think Chicago. It's been a while since I've read the book, but to reveal society's ills and how things work to try to change society for the better. I mean, it's part and parcel to we would call the construct of the fourth estate, which is journalism, which is of course tied to the separation of powers, which is tied to the sort of ideal in order to form a more perfect union, of which the United States has been struggling from its very beginning, predicated on some really tremendous intellectual ideas based on history, to create democracy, to create a country of, by, and for the people, to create a separation of powers where the judiciary has integrity of the law, to where the law and everything about the country, particularly through its political design, which is power, to create a society that works for the people as opposed to works for those that have the most control, because we were born out of tyranny. That's the idea. Tyranny has been around a long time, and democracy, has been around a long time too, to battle tyranny. But did democracy get it completely right throughout history? Of course not. The notion of democracy is equality. One person, one vote. Everybody has a stake in the outcome of our political process that determines how the power of the government, which has the ultimate authority, will transpire between elections. Who will the government work for and why? And the accountability is, of course, in the vote. That's the idea. But the only soup to nuts national election that we have is for the presidency. Everything else is more regional, state, county, city, whatever the case, right? And democracy can never be perfect because people are not perfect. But there's this nonstop battle between the better angels of our nature and the demons of disaster in our soul. And I got into this sort of X conversation this morning uninterestingly, two threats that were from different universes. One was from somebody who supports Dr. Cornel West and his movement to create, I guess, a people movement to support his candidacy of the United States. And the other one was on another thread for someone running for the office of the United States, Vivek Ramaswamy. And in both cases, it kind of painted the picture of what it is that I'm trying to reveal to you, of which I continue to battle because I don't have the numbers. I don't have the influence that I need to have. In my work, The Con, www.thecon.tv, which took many, many, many years, tens of thousands of hours of effort, and millions of dollars to get it exactly right, we reveal the first half of what gives you the blueprint of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended. That is our system. And that's what I'm trying to give you, because we all see over and over in our social media and our personal conversations and everything else, everybody is aware that the system is corrupt, that everybody's pointing their fingers in other directions at other people's corruption. Interestingly enough, I just pointed to the ass of a deer that looks like it's in my backyard. So that was kind of funny and unexpected. But yeah, corruption is something that we're all aware of, but unfortunately, a vast majority of us don't understand the details of corruption because we don't understand how our society is organized, how it's engineered, what our role is as a citizen. There is a lot of manipulation and deception and perversion of information in our society that's gone, completely nuts since the advent of social media, particularly. And all of it is a tool, quite frankly, to manipulate our worst impulses. And I'd say that those that attain power throughout history are very aware of people's worst impulses and know how to leverage it and know how to manipulate it and know how to control it so that they can be in power. That's ultimately what leads to tyranny. That's what created aristocracies and the whole notion of serfdom and control, of which, to a degree, transitioned to religious serfdom through the Holy Roman Empire and everything that construct reveals over the course of thousands of years. And, religion is politics. It always has been. I mean, it certainly tells a great story that has to, through psychological sort of constructs from the very beginning, get us into a mindset that there is a reason things happen. And we kind of interpret that as faith. And many of us have this sort of us versus them mentality, that there's the dark side versus the light side. And it gets really confusing when people who think they're on the light side are literally on the dark side, and then so much more. I mean, there's just, what I've learned is that it's all about power. It's all about psychology of power. It's all about manipulation and control, and a lot of times violence. And so when I opened up this truth bomb today, I was thinking about, kind of a lighthearted disposition of, what I think I've lived to some degree. I mean, The Big Lebowski and Kingpin, in both of those wonderful comedic masterpieces, I mean, I can completely relate to the world being so crazy and chaotic that it's like you feel like you've had your ass kicked to the point where it's like, Jesus, are you kidding me? It's comedic. It's that thing that I've referenced in many of my truth bombs before. What I think basically captures the spirit and the essence of this sort of reality of the human journey is that mask that represents theater, right? You see the Divine Comedy, which is both the ecstasy of laughter and comedy and, just kind of absurd sort of notions of the absurdity of life, i.e. the Divine Comedy, and of course tragedy, right? Which is, I don't think I have to go further into that. Obviously, we see it every day, all day, and it plays out in all of our threads. And who am I and what am I trying to achieve and why are these truth bombs important and are they important? Because they're only important if people are paying attention to them. And who am I? Again, most people who don't know who I am, if they come in flat footed and they don't have any contacts and they don't have any awareness, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to judge. They're going to be like, why are you so narcissistic? And this happened in one of my threads recently, that you're literally putting yourself above everyone else and causes and things that are important to us because you're telling us that we have to listen to you. Doesn't sound anything different than many of the others that we despise, for example. So people who might be my allies can't grasp or accept or even get past the front door of who I am if they hear me say, for example, and I happen to do this on an X thread recently, I happened to watch, and I thought this was another pop culture reference that I'll make that I think really ties it all together. So I happened to go to a movie theater the other day with my son, which was fantastic, and we saw the premiere of Aquaman. Incidentally, we spent pretty significant cake on the tickets. I think it was $14 a ticket, and then I had some rewards points and everything else. But by the time I got popcorn and I think a couple of pretzels and extra cheeses that they paid for and a blue icy and all of those things that we like to have when we watch these movies in these fantastic theaters, with this just unbelievable sound and technology of this overwhelming sensation of this visual imagery that tells a story that seems to be the same story that, quite frankly, Warner Brothers has been telling us for the last 20 years over and over and over. I saw elements in this film Aquaman, who I happen to just love, Jason Momoa, but it was literally a cross between, I think I saw elements of, the Fellowship of the Ring. I mean, all of the, J.R.R. Tolkien, all of those films, from The Hobbit all the way through, The Three Rings and all of those sorts of films that had elements of that because Sauron certainly had sort of an analogous sort of scenario. And as did it have pieces of Jurassic Park. I think I saw pieces of King Kong Skull Island. I saw bits of, Star Wars. I saw bits of, even they made a direct shout out to Harry Potter. And as absurd as it all was, I was enjoying every minute of it. I was thinking to myself that the executives, that are at these studios, the studio chiefs that greenlight these types of projects do so because A, they know what people are going to go watch. And so they just give us the same thing over and over and over. And yeah, suckers like me will buy a ticket every time. And I'll be, completely critical of it and laugh at the absurdity of it all. But at the same time, I'll eat my popcorn and I'll love it. And I'll just watch it and go, oh my God. But at the end, what's hilarious is that Jason Momoa, this absolute, perfect specimen of a human being, really in all ways. I mean, not just his physicality, his athleticism and that sort of thing, but his sense of humor, his bro humor, and what it's all about. And I can imagine, because I'm in the business and I am a producer, I can imagine his agent basically writing in with the studios. It's like, look, Jason's going to do this. Here's the money, but here's a couple of things that he wants to do and he wants the film to say. Because Jason Momoa is from Hawaii and he grew up on the beaches and he understands the whole nature of destroying the oceans and rising, sea levels that would have, significant impact on the Hawaiian Islands, and has, for example. And so the whole film was baked into, our awareness and to create more awareness of the climate crisis because he's aware of it. And he panged the villain in the story was this long shadow sort of satanic like darkness, like I said, that we've seen in all of these previous films, that ultimately was tapping this energy that they used for their own power, but that was simultaneously destroying the oceans and then ultimately the world. And so what the film was, revealing within the context of all of the, interpersonal sort of sequences and relationships and that sort of thing, and then everything that we can relate to. And it was like by the book, it was almost written by AI, I can imagine. But the big difference is a guy who you can't create. I almost thought that Jason Momoa was like improvising in these $20 million sets. because he just has such a great sense of humor. And I love the guy. And at the end, he doesn't really care because he knows the film's going to have to be baked on him, unless someday, or until someday, that yeah, AI takes over. But because of the writer's strike and everything else, that's possibly not going to happen. Hopefully for the foreseeable future. But what's my point? I am what all of these films project. I am the guy that has the answers, that is literally the only way that can turn this dark shadow power upside down, inside out, put it into the light, so that if tens of millions of people were listening to me, who understood who I was, who trusted me, who joined me, who marched with me arm in arm, that we could simply do what we have to do as the citizenry of the United States, that ultimately the way it's written into the Constitution and the entirety of the Bill of Rights and the whole sort of mindset of the founding fathers, for all of their flaws, which was in order to form a perfect union. And and Benjamin Franklin said, it's a great system if you can keep it. And the idea is that, look, man, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Most people are incredibly malleable and moldable to their situation of survival. And if they get into a bad situation, they do what the money tells them to do, and not to see the reality of what's happening until, unfortunately, they get spit out by a system that finds them to be expendable. Listen, it's really hard to go to a movie these days and spend that kind of money if you have many children, and then you have higher prices on, whether it's your rent or it's your mortgage or it's, the energy that you need to get to work and all of the other costs associated with it. And then you end up, getting on credit, which is what the system wants you to do. And once you're in that debt slavery trap, there's no way out. And they have you, and they completely own you, until something catastrophic happens, like it did to me in 2008, where the floor drops out or the ceiling drops on your head, or whatever metaphor you want to think of that crushes your life, and then everything goes sideways and you can never get it back. And because of who I am and what I do and what I've always been about, because I studied political science, I've always been politically engaged. I've known history. I'm fascinated, almost obsessed with history, particularly as it relates to the Nazis and fascism. And I know problems when I see it. And I've always considered myself someone, as a citizen, and maybe inspired by a lot of these movies, that might give me the audacity to think, oh yeah, in the real life, you're supposed to not bend the knee to evil, to use another pop culture reference. And yeah, I would have been on the side of the Starks and, and everybody who won out in the end, except I wouldn't have wanted to stab Daenerys Targaryen in the back, but there's that. So why are we at this impasse? What is it that I have to achieve to somehow inspire you that, oh my God, the curtain has been lifted, the light is shining through, and this dude who's, quite frankly, I'd say, and I hope, because I'm certainly not narcissistic. If you understand the definition of narcissism is that I put myself above others. No, I'm not. I'm doing this to elevate everyone else. Because I know that's it. First of all, that's just who I am. I'm a team player. But second of all, it's because that's the only way we, the people, can break the bondage of tyranny. And yeah, it is up to us at this stage of the game in 2023, and it's like, I don't know, 20 years past when it should have happened. But now things are completely in disarray because of everything I say on my truth bombs. Look, corruption births and fuels fascism. So who is Patrick Lovell? Patrick Lovell is the guy who has the answers, because I found them, because I went out and I had to go on a massive odyssey that I was able to put together, because I have this construct, this DNA, all of these things that enabled me to go find the truth. And what is the truth? Well, it's the truth that you all intuitively are aware of. In a functioning America, where a country is working for, of, and by the people, where the integrity of law is supreme, you do not have a scenario where Patrick Lovell gets crushed and suddenly has to start asking questions because his entire worldview got turned upside down, and he had to pull the threads because he became obsessed with what destroyed him. Because I don't like to just go into the night and disappear when I know I've been sucker punched. I'm a fighter. I always have been. But this was like a whole nother level, a whole nother tier of being able to figure out what's going on. And so I go on this journey that costs millions of dollars, that takes tens of thousands of hours to put together at the highest levels, to cross every D, dot every I, T, and dot every I, to get it exactly right, to do the work that the sum total of our federal government, which constitutes, in this particular case, all of these different regulatory bodies that come from institutions such as the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI and what we call AGs, Attorney Generals around the United States. There are stopgaps because all of these entities work in collaboration to be able to prevent what it is that took place that turned everything upside down and inside out and perverted everything. And I knew it intuitively, like you. I knew that everything is rigged. I knew that everything is corrupt, but that's not where it ends for me. I had to know who did what, when, and how, and I had to understand the system. I'm a systems guy. I understand systems, particularly our government, because that's what I studied. And then in my career, I happened to work as a producer where I had a front row seat to power and people that make decisions and the money and all of these things. So by the time I was in my 30s, I knew most of this stuff. And so I knew when they were pissing on my head telling me it was rain. And oh yeah, I knew the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And so from that perspective, I was able to miraculously find a man with means, which is a story unto itself, who tasked me with, if you can figure out how we went of, by, and for the people to of, by, and for the corrupt corporations, then I'm in. And that began what ultimately was, let's call it an 11-year journey on a 13-year odyssey that led to about 6 years in what we call the con, which you can find at www.thecon.tv, which we released in November of 2019, 2020, right when that's when we were starting to pick up steam. But then, of course, the insurrection happened. And then all sorts of weird stuff happened because in the business, to get distribution, if you want to wind up on something like HBO or Netflix, there's a way that happens, and that methodology usually requires being on the inside of the machine. And there's all sorts of complexities of how that work. And because I've been in it for a very long time, and we had gotten to the highest levels of representation and all the business apparatuses to do all the right stuff, considering that our story reveals the truth that the entirety of government and all of those institutions I just said that have a budget of about $90 billion a year and tens of thousands of employees weren't able to do. Now, on top of that, the media has tens of thousands of more employees and billions of dollars of more budget, and they couldn't get the answers to the questions that I was seeking. It was the entire system of power, not to mention, and probably this is at the top of the list, was the judiciary. Every one of those facets of government and power were opaque, and I could tell from what I was seeing, had completely missed something, and I couldn't understand what they had missed and why. But I knew there had to be a reason. And oh yeah, there was. And as I was able to pull the thread and the thread and the thread and the thread that seemed to never end and never end and never end, we were able to put it together. We did what we call an investigation that does what you're supposed to do in the court of law to be able to show a crime. You got to be able to show all of the elements of intent and what they did that are illegal, because we have statutes and laws across the board to prevent what happened from happening, where tens of millions of people were set up in an illegal pyramid Ponzi scheme that basically worked its way around all of the existing laws, quite simply because everybody in the system was incentivized to do so by the bosses. And the entirety of the system turned out to be racketeering. That's what we proved. But on a global, a mammoth scale, the likes that had never been seen before in history, that many, many of you know intuitively happened, but you can't put your heads around it because it's like literally trying to kind of conceptualize the universe sometimes. People hear numbers, but they can't understand the numbers. I mean, the distance between the Earth and Saturn is unbelievable, but that's nothing in the confines of space and just the enormity of space. And that's kind of the parallel of what we're talking about. We're talking the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that never ended. Now, you might ask yourself, if you're kind of fundamentally aware of some things and you know, like maybe you got into the first episode and you haven't gotten past that, maybe you question things like, hey, Patrick, this is kind of history, right? This is something that happened 13 years ago. And don't we have all of the answers to what happened? No, that's the whole point. You don't have the answers to what happened. And that's why it never ended. And that's why it has complete control of everything. And what is it? It's corruption. Well, what is the corruption? Is it, let's say, my city council member getting some sort of quid pro quo because his daughter got into a private school and he gets to, maybe green light a budget for, I don't know, like a new sign in your neighborhood that's going to have like 35 miles an hour because you want to protect the kids in your. No, I'm not talking about that kind of quid pro quo. I'm talking about our entire financial system. And I'm talking about every single aspect of our consumption in American society predicated on 4 to 5 decades of what many refer to, and it is, globalism based on neoliberalism that came with a whole lot of geopolitics and war and many other things, but most importantly, how the system operates, which is through the law and policy. And what we got to, because we learned all of these lessons, believe it or not, and this is part and parcel to who I am and what I'm trying to enlighten you, and what I didn't understand prior to me going on this journey, was the reality that we had faced many of these same questions before and during the Great Depression, which ultimately would lead to World War II and everything that got reset from that, where 70 million people ended up killed because of a murderous regime and ambition of the Nazi, parameters and everything that went with it, but then what it went up against in terms of Western powers and the whole deal. And we could discuss that sidebar, all day, every day, because it's fascinating and it's wonderful, and nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything that you're dealing with today was preceded by what happened yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. There is destiny. Destiny is what happens as a consequence of what you do every day. And so my destiny is to sit here in front of you, to probably not too many people listening, but in context to the information I have, that I have to penetrate your bubble to get you to understand that the financial system over many decades, but primarily the big stuff took place, and probably starting with Reagan, but most notably during the Clinton administration, that reversed everything that we learned and put in place after the Great Depression to create a stable government of by and for the people. You got to think of it as ballast, like a ship. A ship or an airplane all have to operate a specific way. They are engineered to have all of their sum total pieces working in congruency to be able to manifest them operating safely so that they don't sink or crash. This is the same with the economy and the same with the government. But the trick that the powerful people have learned long ago, the diabolical people that operate in the shadows, that use all sorts of tricks and deception to prey upon people's vulnerability or gullibility or complicity, because a lot of people are weak and they're cowards and they kiss the ring and they don't have a come from where they have the architecture within their own soul to live and breathe and fight and die and do everything to live with truth and justice and dignity and integrity. And the whole thing is called integrity. And for me, it's for liberty and justice for all, based on the integrity of law, because that's what the founding fathers understood, as did those that preceded them in myriad of ways, because of all of these lessons in history, to fight tyranny for the most part. And that includes all sorts of economic designs and the engines and everything that we could get into and discuss about capitalism and its replacement of feudalism, and ultimately what Marx would write about that, and what capitalism would become and what capitalism is and isn't in the nature of 2023. Those are all very important questions and very important things to discuss. But I can give you all of the information that just completely undresses all of it when you understand the blueprint of what we call control fraud. It's who did what, when, and how, and why to create this system that you don't understand. And it that doesn't make you stupid. I know people that are engineers. I know people that are doctors. I know people that are brain surgeons that don't know this information. It's called asymmetric information. Their profession is to do things where it takes all of their time, where they're experts in that, and that's what they get paid for because they expect the system to work. If you and I go and fly on an airplane, we expect the plane to get us from point A to point B without crashing. And those operators that fail to achieve that would not be in business very long. Why? Well, I think the answer is self-evident. But in terms of asymmetric information is what this is called, is that not everybody understands everything that's going on at every given moment because it's just too much. And it's, where's your focus? Well, my focus over the course of the last 13 years, where I got paid millions of dollars to create, I didn't get paid personally, projects cost millions of dollars, but to create the revelations that ultimately led us to discover what is the now, but I got to do it in congruency. It started off as the $33 trillion truth that is now north of $70 trillion. And what is that $33 trillion truth? Well, the entirety of our financial system set up hundreds of millions of people around the world, at least 50 million Americans, both in the housing collapse and in the adjoining or connected pension collapse, because of the way the whole thing works. And it was all a racketeering scheme. And what is racketeering? Well, it's RICO is racketeering, influence, corrupt organization laws that prevent what is most of us would think of as the mafia, organized crime. That you can have a kingpin, a godfather, with the capos and the consigliaries and everybody else that do whatever they have to do to create situations where that on the street level, they go and break some arms to basically skim off of all of the businesses to basically feed the kitty and create power so that they can buy off judges and police so that they have complete control, not the people voting for the government. It's all called corruption. But that model that's been around for, quite frankly, a very long time wound up becoming our government. Because the government isn't of, by, and for the people. The government is of, by, and for the corrupt corporations that have complete control, starting with our financial system. And it is connected to our fossil fuel system. And those guys are pretty much at the apex of this thing, plus military industrial complex. Those guys are kind of like the triangle at the top of the all-seeing eye, if you wanted to think about the dollar bill. And they have complete control of our government. But most notably in this particular case, the Federal Reserve, which is our central bank. And here's the big trick, because I think a lot of us have kind of lived through the parable one way or the other, where our parents trying to make a decision, or not making a decision, but make a point, for example, that money doesn't grow on trees, that you've got to live within your means, that you've got to be responsible. You've got to go get an income to be able to pay for the things that you want to pay for. And you've got to learn that from a young age so that by the time you get into, let's call it your late 20s, you're in a position to hopefully make enough money if you meet the right person where you can come together and raise a family. And then hopefully between your two incomes, you can afford a life to be able to bring children up in this world in a way that they're safe. I think that's the American dream to a large part. There's so much more to the American dream than that, but I think that's what most of us would think that we spend most of our time doing, is working towards that. But ultimately what happens is a lot of us get in over our heads because we don't understand the financialization of this country. We get into debt. Many of us get 2 to 3 jobs. Maybe we have a house that we think we've got to be able to survive, to be able to, that's our nest egg, our retirement and everything else. But yet we don't understand all of the kind of sequences of events that create whatever that appraised value of that house is and what that fits in terms of the securitization process. And all you're really concerned about is your credit rating, because you know that your ability to make income is going to be at a specific level and relatively stagnant. That's most people. And that most people think that the only way you can make money is to get involved with the securitization process where you play in the casino of Wall Street. And that's what it's become. But unlike a casino that you walk into in Vegas or Atlantic City or everything else, where yeah, maybe they stack the odds against you at blackjack, or whatever the numbers are in the sports book and all of that kind of stuff, because the masters that are setting the numbers, they know they're really good at what they do and they're playing the numbers, right? But as much as it's all stacked against you, you still have a relative chance to be able to win. And you don't think, for example, that even though the house always wins eventually, and everybody knows that, right? But you think the house wins eventually because everybody's playing to see if they can get a little piece. And it's fun in the meantime. And they'll give you free drinks and they'll give you shows and they'll do this thing. So it's money worth spent for a lot of people that go in there, and that's part of the allure of it all. And, some people get it in over their heads and they do it to where they destroy everything and there's no coming back. And anytime you live in an extreme sort of way, chances are you're going to wipe out. But that doesn't happen to the denizens of disaster and the shadow that have complete control. Because what they have been looting, what they have been parasites to, is the real economy and the real power that the United States had become after World War II to become this global superpower. And yeah, we had this huge industrial capacity, and we had, the last country standing, and we got to rebuild the world. And because of that, we created, the only opportunity probably in history where we had a thriving middle class. I mean, people could argue that there were merchants throughout history that were the middle class, and then pirates, of course, and all those kinds of things. But the idea of a country of by and for the people, and this notion of democracy, so that we could hold power to account, suddenly found itself, in the 50s, to where those that could get a white picket fence and a house to raise their children and go to school and live happily ever after, the American dream, that was a possibility because of the sheer, let's say, commitment, or I should say sacrifice, of the greatest generation that defeated fascism, and eventually communism, even though we had all sorts of weird ass shit that we were in the midst of. And I could go on and on and on, but I'll kind of close with this. So today we're talking about, in a myriad of ways, whether it's going to be nonstop Trump at all times. What my message to people who support Trump, for example, that got there because they had their pensions completely destroyed by Wall Street, and you had your jobs looted, or you went sideways or stagnated, 4 decades of neoliberalism that you attest to, mostly the Democratic Party and its, shall we say, revolving door with Wall Street. And you went to Trump because that was a better alternative for you given what happened to you in your life. I understand why you feel that way, and you're not wrong. But Trump is no answer to this problem. Trump is the expression of the problem. And Trump, I could go into a myriad of my introspection and my reaction to all things Trump and MAGA, which is mostly stupidity. Trump is such a chump, and he's a chump staying at that in every which way to Sunday. And it's just unbelievably gross to know that a guy who got born on third base, well, he was born on after home run after home run. I think, back in the 70s when Papa Fred Trump, passed away with all of the stuff that he was involved with, including the KKK, I think he left Donald somewhere in the 600 million to 800 million range back, before the 70s. I mean, we're talking about the 60s or something like that. That amount of money was significant. Trump, being the playboy, party boy that he was involved with all sorts of crazy ass shit. But mostly was involved with real estate, and he had to play ball on the terms and infiltrated and being a part of both the political calculus of, we'll call it Tammany Hall of Manhattan and New York, and how these things work with incentives, with real estate. But yet to get the buildings built, for example, and all of these constructions that he never completely owned, it was investors and everything else for specific outcomes based on all of the calculus of what I just inferred. But you still had to play ball with the 5 mob families of New York who had control of the concrete, control of the workers and the unions and all of these types of things. And so to play ball, you had to play ball with everybody. And he did a lot of dark influences, particularly that played out. And we saw, for example, he owned the Plaza Hotel, and he was involved with all sorts of kind of pre-versions through Roy Cohn and all of these other guys back from the the 50s that were doing this stuff forever. And what am I referring to? They were using sexploitation with the mob to get powerful people leveraged so that they could get their way. And what does that mean? Well, it was basically a precursor to Epstein. And yeah, Trump was deeply involved with Epstein. I mean, the surface level of it is, yeah, Epstein got a lot of his masseuses from Mar-a-Lago, Trump's, Southern White House when he was the president, right? But also he introduced his wife, Melania, to Trump. But Trump was involved with all sorts of dark figures his entire career. How do you think he wound up in Atlantic City? But I think most of us in the United States, we were raised, we understood that there were like, okay, there are dark forces in our society and people do this, but eventually they get busted. I know in my generation, there wasn't anything that we couldn't imagine because we had everything from like Pablo Escobar and global cocaine laundering. And then, of course, the CIA got involved and they started looting or putting crack into inner cities. And then they started taking that money and throwing it into black ops and getting, all sorts of military arms to, dark forces in places like the Middle East. And it goes on and on and on. But a lot of that stuff was tied to real estate, by the way. And that includes the Saudis and Khashoggi and Donald Trump. Wherever there was big money and dark money apparatuses, Donald Trump was in the midst of it. And Donald Trump told us the whole time, all of the politicians play for me. I played both sides. And then he always said these things like the Republicans are the dumbest people ever. And if I were going to run for a party, it'd be the Republicans because I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and, nothing would happen to me. And all of that stuff has come true. And so Republicans typically who support the notion of law and order and conservatism and everything else, they made a deal with the devil with all things Trump. Why? Because they could get Supreme Court justices to do their bidding on things that are important to them, like abortion and other things, just mostly control. But they've always been manipulated by the plantation owners. They've always been in the midst of this hierarchy, patriarchy that basically tells them what to do. And you can do stuff and be relatively free. And what we convince you of is if the lowest rung white man is higher than the highest rung black man, you can pick his pockets all day. LBJ taught us that. But what does that mean in terms of MAGA and Trump and everything else? Well, ultimately, it means that 70 million people voted for a guy that tried to steal the election and was treacherous and treasonous. And it's just as light as day. And there's more to it, much more to it than anything that we've seen so far by what the, January 6th investigations have revealed and that sort of thing. But ultimately, he has, and what he does is he represents, look, during Trump, for example, and a lot of the Trumpers are like, oh my God, all of this stuff about Hunter Biden and Burisma and all of these things that he represents and he's the bad guy and the Biden family is corrupt. Yeah, they are. In more ways than you can imagine that are part of the establishment that goes back 4 decades that includes, all things LLCs in Delaware, pharmaceutical companies, credit card companies, the prison industrial complex, and things that are really significant, much more so than Burisma, I can assure you that, even though there's certainly elements to be concerned about. But compared to, let's say, Steve Mnuchin on the Trump side of the campaign, his former Treasury Secretary and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, getting $6 billion from Saudi to bail out their almost potential bankruptcies and certain property to launder more money. That's what Trump's planned for. Not to mention his involvement, all things with dark overlords around the world in terms of laundering money into real estate, particularly Russia. And yeah, Russiagate wasn't the much debunked Hillary Clinton, or I should say Clinton Foundation / their influence with the Steele dossier and all that stuff. That might be debunked, but not Trump's relationship with Deutsche Bank by any means. So what we're talking about is just a straight up criminal. And most of you know that. But you're like, well, he's our criminal. He's our big daddy, and I like him much more than the other guy. Plus he shows up at UFC, stuff. And so look, he's the answer. No, he's not the answer. But is Biden the answer? No. Biden's been a part of this thing that created everything, but particularly in most, I'd say, blame goes to Obama and Eric Holder during the 2008 great financial crisis that created this mayhem that is creating more and more of the reality of what I say all the time. Corruption burrs and fuels fascism. And by the way, it's all predicated, most of it, I'd say, on a global scale, particularly the military-industrial complex and all things infiltration and world wars and all that sort of thing over the last 20 years at least, is predicated on oil, which of course our dollar as a global reserve currency and Wall Street methodologies and the way it all works, much of it is what we show you in the con, is predicated on this relationship that is poisoning us all, and we had the technology to move past fossil fuel 20 years ago. And what am I revealing to you? Well, I'm revealing to you that there's a small, tiny pocket of power players that are raping and pillaging everything we think we are. They live above the law, which is pure tyranny, pure mafiocracy, pure betrayal. And what it's created, and what I say all the time, is that we don't have a democracy, nor are we a constitutional republic. We are a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism, the full faith and credit of the United States, to sustain itself. And now it's fueling fascism. That's our reality. And we've been, like I said, it's a corporate fascist state for now decades, okay? You don't need to know all of these things specifically in a way that I do, because I've spent tens of thousands of hours of doing it. What you need to know is who did what, when, and how, and what it means for you. We don't have a choice in the 2023 election that's going to break the back of corruption. Cornel West can't do it. I promise you that. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can't come anywhere close to this. Nobody on the Republican side. The Republicans are, I mean, like, I laughed my ass off watching Vivek Ramaswamy accuse, the front runner from South Carolina for being a tool of the Kochs. And then that whole disarray, right? I mean, the whole thing is an absolute chaotic, insane mess, except for the people who are in control. And I'm the biggest threat that exists to what this whole system is, because I have the answers. And if I can educate you, if I can inspire you, if I can get you on board with me, our vision, and I say our because I'm involved with other people, is that we're creating a populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption and drown the fascism it fuels, to create the new Renaissance. The redemption is in what we call the Clean New Deal. And what is the Clean New Deal? Well, we've got to do a modern day, what I kind of prefaced earlier, that we got right after the Great Depression, to kind of create the balance of the keel so that the system can function. And that was done by a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pecora, who did the deep dive. He was an Italian immigrant who just happened to understand the mob. And yeah, he got inside Wall Street secrets and he turned it upside down, inside out. And we ended up with a law called Glass-Steagall that separated investment banks from commercial banks, because you got to have financing. You absolutely have to. Just like that deer needs food, that we all need sustenance. Yeah, you need the lifeblood of capitalism, and we can evolve what capitalism is. But the Clean New Deal has to be able to, A, make the case to the American people, and quite frankly, the world, to expose everything that I'm saying, to get everybody's attention focused on what the real calamity is, of what the real enemy is. And we need to expose that and hold that to account. And it has to go a specific way. And I'm the gateway to that, because I do work with all the top minds from the Department of Justice who've been there for 30 years that had to step out because of the corruption. And same with the FBI and the SEC. And I know, because of my thousands and thousands of hours of work on the con, all the right people that can do this. But we need millions of people to champion this. And why do you want this to happen? Why would you want the Clean New Deal to happen? Because $70+ trillion has gone into the hands of the few that have complete control of the system, that have complete control of the Supreme Court, that have complete control of Congress, that have complete control of the presidency. It's all a facade. It's not a choice of the lesser of two evils. You know this. You know that the only way that we can save the world from the rot of tyranny and poison of this monstrous machine that we built, and it served its purpose a long time ago. But like what happens throughout all empire, throughout history, is that when you get a group of men in society that discover plunder, what they create is a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. And that's what we did, where the market is God. Not for a market that needs to be sustainable, and it's certainly not free market. I can assure you that. It's called monopoly. And there's so much more. But if you want a nation that can function in a way that is progressive, to where more people have opportunities, to where there is a fair system, to where the integrity of law is supreme, and that ultimately that innovation can happen. All of these things are possible. We have proved it over and over and over as a society, but we've hit this situation now where too much information is completely choked by the mainstream media that has completely hid this from you, and then of course, the nature of everything online. I mean, I can draw a straight line between Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan to a degree. I don't put him in the same category because he's not somebody that they can control, but definitely Tucker Carlson is controlled. Russell Brand is controlled. Jimmy Dore is controlled. What they're controlled by is getting in the algorithms to get the clicks as clickbait, to get you engaged as much as possible so that you listen to what they're talking about and the outrage circus that goes, on 24 hours a day, which a lot of the times is completely justified. And identity politics is important too, but it's not the core tumor of the corruption that has complete control. Everything else is a facade. But I have to finish on this note because it is extremely important. I read, among other things, this morning, and this was horrific. I know a lot of people that want to put the war in Israel and Hamas and Palestinians at the apex of their kind of thought process. And many people have explored or exposed themselves to that, their position that Israel is really the evil that is practicing genocide on the Palestinians and everything that makes. And they go to the streets, to the millions, and they fight, and they do. And the system is, this thing is still going on. And there are so many people that, with the clickbait and everything else, because it is their thing, like somebody I've been on her show several times, or twice actually, Crystal Ball. I mean, her whole focus is Norman Finkelstein right now, and he makes some great points, and all things Gaza and the history of Israel and all of those things that are happening. And I've basically revealed myself in the truth bombs many times before. I'm Jewish, even though I'm not really practicing. I come from a Reform background, and I don't want to go into that whole thing. But I believe in Israel's right to exist above all else, and I believe in, well, not above all else by any stretch, but I believe in Israel's right to exist no matter what. And I believe it in as a democracy based on a lot of the Jewish traditions because it was born from the Holocaust, and there has to be a homeland for the Jewish people. And yeah, the Jewish people will survive one way or the other. They have for 1,000 years against ridiculous odds, and a whole lot of people that have tried to destroy them over and over and over. And does that make them okay to bomb through, carpet bombing or through, what do we call it, indiscriminate bombing? Where I think, we're close to 20,000 dead in this conflict since October 7th, including children that have been buried under rubble, and the imagery is absolutely horrific. And what I'm about to say doesn't justify that. Because I've also mentioned in my truth bombs before that, my mindset, because I do understand all things Israel, the evolution, all the things that led to it, thousands of years of information, and ultimately it doesn't make me an expert, but I'm certainly working knowledge of a lot of this stuff in a very high level way, particularly all of the things that have happened since 1948 and everything that's happened since. And we could argue about every single one of those situations, right? Not to mention, where it led, but my thinking on the October 7th attacks, where I did, find, and we have discovered that Israel had the information in advance that Hamas was planning this attack in the way that they did and did nothing about it. And, I've always scratched my head that, a bunch of guys in paragliders were able to, get over these walls, even though I've seen how they were able to do it and everything else. But it's still hard for me to believe that, considering the defense mechanisms that were in place, that you can have an Iron Dome where you shoot down 500 rockets, and I know there was like 5,000 or something that were pieced together in the tunnels of. It was a pretty amazing commitment. But when the paragliders got over the walls, and there just so happened to be this peace festival that was taking place right on the border of it, like 9/11, I'm like, there's no way in hell the Israeli Defense Force didn't know this was happening. And there's no way in hell that I think that, given the monstrosity of what took place, that they would have reacted as late as they did. But it all feels like a giant, to me, setup to justify this whole thing. But this is who was collateral damage. So in the New York Times this morning, there is this revelation front page that I know a lot of Palestinian people that are supporters of Palestinians and everything else are going to say, where's the evidence? they don't trust it. And I don't trust the New York Times either, because of everything that I've been revealing to you. I've worked with some of the top editors at the New York Times. I know what the New York Times did not reveal knowingly about what it is that I'm revealing to you. Okay? So they're not on the highest order of super integrity. Okay? But I buy this story. There's too much detail, there's too much evidence, there's too much that they would put on the line for this not to be the reality. But try to sequence this in terms of what I just laid out, right? So women were targeted and brutally raped, gang raped at this music festival where there are episodes of women being bent over and trained while being stabbed in the back and mutilated, their breasts cut off and kicked around by the terrorists. And many of them were shot in the vagina with nail guns while they were alive and decimated, burned alive, and tortured and ripped apart. The savagery, the brutality is the ultimate evil. And there's a lot of evil. We've seen it generation and generation. The Holocaust was evil. There's, the Ming Dynasty, and, I don't know, every warfare throughout history, there's been absolute brutality. This brutality is insane. And did the IDF or did, for example, Netanyahu maybe use them as bait and allow this whole thing to happen to create this scenario where they could do this huge, scenario where they're going to destroy Hamas is the end game, and a lot of course all the people like Chris Hedges and everybody out there, no, they're not gonna destroy Hamas. Oh yeah, they are. But Hamas could probably pipe back in. Of course, anytime that you've got the networking of Saudi and other people, living off of high oil revenue, and UAE, where they can, put guys, into safe places where Israel's not going to go attack them there because they've got the Abraham Accords and there's other political sort of junkets. But the people are always expendable. Okay, is what I think about this whole thing. Did Israel want a two-state solution over the course of the last 20 years? No, Likud and Netanyahu and the influence of billionaires that have been, transgressing and creating this sort of movement of settlers in the West Bank and so forth. I mean, I saw this disaster coming a long time ago. I threw in my hat in the ring a long time ago. I always thought a two-state solution might be possible, but I always thought that you had to have a partner for peace. If you go back to Martin Luther King and you go back to the whole civil rights movement, none of that would have been possible, first and foremost, without the Civil War. But Jim Crow survived. And by the way, a lot of those elements of Jim Crow led to a lot of things that, quite frankly, influenced Hitler. Not to mention, I found out later, and I heard recently from somebody I don't respect or trust on a mass basis, but some of her work I like, Rachel Maddow. She's got this new podcast out called, I think, Prequel, where she's talking about fascism in the United States and how Henry Ford was an inspiration to Adolf Hitler. Wow. And there's so much more at that era, okay, that we could unpack and we could talk about. But this brutality of Hamas potentially being set up by Netanyahu after Gaza being an open-air prison, and then I guess Hamas became the ruling party because they were voted in by people that were holding, accountable, that were children that have no idea how to vote in power that, they have to answer to, which is kind of this perversion, quite frankly, of what the Republicans constantly remind us of constitutional republic, which is ruled by the minority. We have all sorts of tricks in the United States through gerrymandering and voter IDs and everything else. And then, of course, unfortunately, a lot of people that, have the right to vote don't, and nor do they know what the issues are. So the whole thing's kind of like it's a facade when people aren't informed and people don't take the time to understand and learn and see what's real and what's not. So, what is the mayhem in Gaza and this brutality and this horrific revelation of women being mutilated and shot in the vagina with nail guns have to do with, everything I'm trying to get you to see? When absolute power corrupts absolutely, the collateral damage are innocent people who don't want to play the game of power, who've given it up, who expect that other people that are voted into power, that we give our power to, are going to work in our best interests. No, calamity is the consequence when you don't rise to the threshold of your responsibility as a citizen. You literally are the last bastion of the attempt of our founders to be able to hold power to account by putting power in the hands of the people. And there's only one way that can happen is if you understand how absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's what I'm giving you, one piece at a time, every day. And my voice is the only voice that is willing to do this, soup to nuts, in an unapologetic way, that is willing to meet anyone, anywhere on their terms to reconfigure what's going on, to try to wrestle tens of millions of you into unity. We have to rise unified. We have to rise with one fist. We have to rise with the ideals of what it is we are, to overcome the evils of our nature and of history. It's on our shoulders. And as I've said before, I've been pushing this up Mount Everest like it's a boulder to the top of the world backwards without shoes on by myself. I need millions of you to join me to help push this to the apex so that we can push it over the side, so that when it starts to go down, it gets the momentum and snowballs and builds into this giant force that wipes out the corruption that is destroying us. That's why you want to listen to me. That's why you want to explore my work at www.thecon.tv and the New Untouchables and all 439 of my truth bombs. Because no one else has this information, soup to nuts. And the only way we're going to get the truth above the ocean and madness of lies and confusion and disinformation is to make sure that millions of people are educated to what the reality is, so that we can break, like our forefathers, the chains of bondage and tyranny. That is our purpose as Americans. I doubt this is going to reach 10 people. But if it does, like, subscribe, and share like your life depends on it, because it does. Become a believer, become a zealot for the truth and justice and liberty and justice for all, and force what we have into your mind and into the minds of everybody who's got a voice. And then they'll start paying attention to us. And oh yeah, it would really help if you spent $13 to be able to help us get this information out to the public. I've got hundreds and hundreds of hours of information and thousands pieces of documents. We're going to create, if we can, a Lollapalooza-like national, barnstorming tour where we take these facts to the American people to build momentum to wind up in Washington, D.C. under the gaze of Abraham Lincoln with millions of Americans equipped with the truth, where we do our part like Abraham Lincoln did his with the Union to break the bonds of slavery, and of course, all things that came with, quite frankly, General Grant and the Union Army that crushed the Confederacy. And it was a fight to the finish, let me tell you. Did not come easy. And there was a lot of people in the South who joined the North, by the way. That's very important to understand also. Not all white people are evil, my friends. You know that. We can't like this about us versus them, white supremacy versus the rest of us. No, we're Americans. So if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency, and most of all, above all, integrity, that enables us to create sustainability and, of course, beauty. If we merge in unity, we will defeat the tyranny of misery. And that is our destiny, and that is the Clean New Deal. There is no time to waste. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt. This is the Clean New Deal. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. Onwards and upwards.